Again, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Go ahead, Ernie.
This is Judy Human. She is the mother of the disability rights, and this is one of her quotes, and that is independent living is not doing things by yourself. It is being in control of how things are done.
Thank you, Ernie. We're still admitting people and we appreciate you being here with us. Just give us just a moment, letting everybody's audio have a chance to connect. And we are letting our content expert grab a glass of water and rejoin us. The slides will be sent out. The chat will come just to the host and the co-host. If you would direct them to myself or to Ernie while David is presenting, that would be great. All right. We're going to move on to the next.
Welcome to housing options, part one of planning. Um, this
Would you like some help?
Yes, please.
Okay. So, housing options, part one, planning. Our content expert, David Gates, is going to be sharing information with us. Uh, we are under Vision for Equality, which is an advocacy organization for families by families that is providing support throughout Pennsylvania. Housing Myth Bustings is a grant that is a project of Vision for Equality that is funded by the Pennsylvania Developmental Disabilities Council. So tonight's presentation has been a collaboration that has David has gone through several different groups that have contributed portions of material, as you'll see listed on this slide. Slides will be sent out at the conclusion. What you should receive those in the next couple of days. And we are going to move on to the next slide.
This is content expert and consultant David Gates. David Gates has represented and worked with individuals with developmental disabilities, their families, and support group in federal and state courts, administrative agencies, and the Pennsylvania legislature since 1976. He was a member of Office of Developmental Programs Information Sharing and Advisory Committee, as well as the project lead for the Pennsylvania Developmental Disabilities Council grant on housing transition tenancy sustaining provider training. David was a project lead on the Urban House Options Demonstration Project grant is currently consulting with us of on Vision for Equality's Bus Housing Myths grant. He has participated in the development of 7 licensed residential microboard, a home owned jointly by 3 waiver participants, and apartment house development with subsidized units, especially with a preference for individuals with developmental disabilities, and other families and self-advocates directed housing model. He was presented at 25 workshops on housing options throughout the state since 2010.
Thank you, Ernie. And thank you, David, for being here.
So tonight, uh, three myth busters. The first one is people with intellectual disabilities and autism can have a home on their own. And it brings us to number two. Good planning helps make the move from a family or group home successful. And there are the resource to help with planning.
So, achieving your vision and planning beyond the family home. Go ahead, David.
So we're going to see a very short video of a self-advocate by the name of Jean Searles. Jean lives in her own home, supported through the consolidated waiver. And I think what's important is that Jean was able to reach this point of being in her own home with a lot of support, but coming out of Pennhurst. So if Jean could do it, I would say that most of you can do it too with the proper support and planning.
I've been living in different apartments mostly all my life, and I really wanted a place that I could call my own, so that I won't have to keep moving back and forth and packing up, moving to another apartment, packing up, moving to another apartment. I want something that I can just say, "This is mine." I don't have to give it up. I don't have to um, go to another apartment or anywhere. This is all mine. I lived in the Poconos for 10 years at two different institutions up there, and Penhurst would have been my third institution.
I apologize. I was letting someone in.
It was kind of scary. It was something that I would never want to do again. And then this was why I'm trying to help people, the governors and all the state reps, and sometimes I'll help the lawyers out. Like, I'll give them my opinion and I'll tell them why I think they should close it and why I think people with disabilities could be in a community and make a life for themselves, like I did.
It's very powerful.
When
So give me just a second. We had some people join in the participation. I just need to let them in from the waiting room. All right. So one of the things that we do when we start thinking about having a vision and thinking about where we want to live and where we want to spend our time is we start thinking about things that are called the life domains. And that is simply, where do you spend your everyday? Who do you spend it with? What access do you have to different things, whether it's where you work, where you practice your fellowship and your worship, whether it is getting an opportunity to have a valued role, it's being able to have your medical needs met. It's knowing whether or not you are safe and secure, knowing which areas are safe to go and which are not. These are the life domains. Daily life and employment, that is simply where you spend your day. Are we looking at a routine schedule? Are we looking at employment? Are we looking at ongoing education, volunteering? What do our life skills look like? What do we need? What's currently in place? And then your daily life and employment is influenced by the community that you live in, the community you're a part of. What are your housing options, which we are going to talk about a little bit? Does your home need adaptations or modifications? What in the community is around you that you have access to? What does that transportation look like? All of those things fall into those two, and they all overlap because that also affects your social and spirituality. Having the friends and developing the relationships in order to have leisure activities, creating those personal networks. Ernie has a fantastic family of choice that he met through his faith community that I'm sure he's going to share with you throughout this presentation. Healthy living is our next life domain. And healthy living, if you live in a community where you have plenty of opportunities to get outside and places to walk and things to go, that affects your healthy living. So does whether or not you have access to medical care. Do you have the transportation to get to the medical care overlapping from the community into the healthy living? That safety and security, what does it look like around your community that you're living in? Do you know how to respond in an emergency? And we've talked about previously with housing myth busting, guardianship and the alternatives to guardianship. Then the advocacy and engagement is being able to make choices for yourself, having that choice and control and those valued roles, and having your place in the community in which you reside. Next up is that integrated support star, and you'll hear us talk about it a little bit as we're moving through the presentation. So we just wanted to give you a couple of the images so you know how we're putting it all together. When we're thinking about an integrated support star, we can think about this as a way to problem solve. We can also think of it a way to look and develop full pictures. When we're thinking about the full picture, we're thinking about each part of this star having quality. And we're thinking, making sure that we have just as many relationship-based supports in our life as we do eligibility specific, as we do access to the community and the technology that we use. And we're developing personal strengths and assets. So Ernie, when I just mentioned earlier that your family of choice,
Yes.
where would you put those?
I would be putting those at community based, relationship based.
And then how do you get a hold of them? What do
By
you
phone,
use?
my cell phone, which is
Mhm.
technology, or my iPad.
All right. And to do all of that, you needed personal strengths and assets.
Absolutely.
So you're outgoing, you're meeting
Absolutely.
people,
Mm-hmm.
and you're active in your community. You are using eligibility specific supports as well to support you. You
Yes,
have you have a staff now, correct?
that's correct.
So do you feel like you're starting to find balance within your integrated support star?
Absolutely.
And has the integrated support star helped you with meeting some of the independent housing goals that you have for yourself?
Yes, absolutely. That definitely.
One of the things that I know just because of knowing you, you used a little bit of this as you were meeting support staff so that you could share what you like to do and where you wanted to go. Were there any other examples of how you might have used the integrated support star?
Uh, I'm just places the strength about me, what they like about me and admire.
Yes. Thank you so much, Ernie. I really appreciate it. So that's just an example of the two of the life course tools. And you don't need to have these fancy graphic organizers in order to use the principles and the philosophies that we are going to be talking about and sharing about. So one of the things that the three of us were just talking about is the length of this presentation. So it is being recorded, and we are making the decision to break it into two parts. And we are looking at the second part being just next Wednesday at a slightly earlier time, but we will make sure that everyone here tonight receives that information. There is so much to go over that David is going to be sharing with us that we felt it was best to break it into two parts. I am going to turn it over to David.
Thank you, Carrie, and thank you, Ernie. So, developing your vision. The life course is a crucial tool in helping you to develop your vision. We're going to discuss a particular component of that vision, which is your housing vision. And here are some of the questions that should be considered in developing your housing vision. What type of home do you want that would meet your needs? Do you have a preferred location? Do you want to share your home with someone else? Are you looking to rent, own a home, or some other arrangement? And does the home and community meet your accessibility needs? So, Ernie, you live in your own home, is that correct?
Absolutely. I rent.
Right. So, what were you, how did you come up with the idea of renting? What were you thinking about in developing your vision of how and where you wanted to live?
Wow, good question, Dave. That very good question. Uh at first I didn't know what a vision I had for my home, but my first home that I was in, it met my needs of, a small house, small apartment studio with a oven, a refrigerator, and the sink, and of course the private bathroom.
Then you chose to move from there. Is that correct? You said the first home.
The first home, but what happened? I had the disaster happen in my first home,
Aha,
with the fire.
right. So then you had to figure out where to go next. So
Absolutely.
what kind of things were important to you while you were figuring out where you were going to go?
Just having faith, is basically one of the things that helped me get through my first home, and it found me another home, which was very nice.
Okay, okay. So well, let me kind of break down here in terms of it was nice. So what about the location?
The
How did the
location
location
was
worked?
the location was awesome. Um, I felt safe in the community. I was
Okay,
close to things.
close to things. Okay, let's keep that in mind. Safety, close to
Safety.
things. Yes, safety one, close to things. That's good. Anything else? I mean, that's enough if that's it, but those
Yeah.
those are two good points to think of. I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but what you're telling us really is important. You actually did, consider these things. You may not have written it down in a specific plan, as we're going to talk about, but these are things that were important to you: safety and close to things. So things would be, what kind of things are we talking about?
We're
Places
talking
to
about places to shop.
Okay.
Something to just worship.
Okay.
Um, when they have to go to get blood work done. I'm close to that location.
Good. So now that's three important things, right? So places to shop, houses of worship, and medical services. There you go. So now that's very important already. Ernie, you have already done a chunk of my presentation here. Uh, you wanted a place that was safe. You wanted a place that was close to things, which included the close to places to shop, close to your house of worship, and a place for medical services, in which case for you was blood work. So that's exactly a real example of what we're talking about when we say developing your vision. I perhaps vision, maybe that's a little too overwhelming term, but the very practical terms is just how Ernie explained it, right? Safe and close to things. That could be that may very well be your vision in terms of housing. Okay, so let's move on. And by the way, Ernie, thank you for that. No, that really was quite helpful.
Oh, well, you're very welcome.
So, uh, and actually, this slide actually reflects back on what Ernie just said. Start with what is important to the individual. So you already told us things that were important to you, and we can do that by, first of all, we need to listen to the individual, not make presumptions, but ask them what they believe by whatever communication method they use, what is important to them. And it may be asking it in some different ways, but, you know, Ernie, you were very able to tell us in your own words what was important to you. And in addition, you will find that information if the individual has a waiver. The waiver has a support plan, which we abbreviate to ISP. And in the ISP, there are various divisions, and one of which is the individual preferences. And within that category, there's important to individual. So both discussing it with the individual, getting some information from the individual's team, and then what's listed in the ISP under important to individual. But we also have to balance what's important to the individual, with what is important for the individual. And we can find that in also the ISP under two sections: what makes sense and health and safety. So those are specific sections in each individual's ISP. So we're looking at these to determine what's important to and important for, and the attempt is to balance these two things. Okay, next slide, please. Um, so be a little more specific here. We do want to identify personal safety concerns. So, Ernie, you mentioned when I asked, what were you looking for? Safety. So, personal safety. This could include fire safety, include for those individuals who wonder how safe is the neighborhood or that particular location. Is it on a busy highway? Maybe that would not be a good location. Number two, an emergency backup plan. And by this, we're talking about plans for when support staff call off, which will happen. And then third is a crisis plan. So the crisis plan, there's a number of kinds of crises, but Ernie, you explained one crisis that you had where you had a fire in your old apartment. And so that clearly is a crisis. And there are other crises which may be something not quite so disastrous as a fire, but it could be something like the power goes out, or it could be plumbing floods. So there are a variety of crises, but there needs to be a plan, general plan, which may be just something like, who do you call? Okay, next. Location considerations. So Ernie, you described some location considerations for you, which is place to shop, houses of worship, and proximity to medical services. And those are clearly three very important location considerations. Another one is availability of support staff. And, and this is an issue in part based on whether you live in a rural area or a more urban area. In a rural area, you may have challenges getting support staff because it may be just simply difficult for them to get to where you live. It will also mean that in many cases, your support staff will probably have to have a working vehicle. If you live in an urban area, you may have public transportation. That's the second bullet here. So that your support staff, you may not have to have or limit your support staff to those who have an automobile, but support staff can use public transportation to get to where you live. And the third one is, will the people active in the individual's life remain close enough to continue offering support? So this, in most cases, this will be family members. If you are living with family and looking to move out into a home of your own, you may choose to live somewhere within maybe a 20, 30-minute drive from the family member's home, so they can not only visit you, but they may also be part of your backup plan if someone calls out. So that kind of proximity is a consideration. Okay, next. Another consideration are opportunities for employment or volunteering. Next one is one that Ernie mentioned, access to medical professionals. And another one that Ernie mentioned, closest food markets or other retail stores. And again, Ernie, you hit another one of these points right there. Proximity to your house of worship. And then the last is proximity to community activities of the individual's interest. So one of the things that we do when we do these housing plans, and now I'm speaking as someone who had done this kind of work, is that we would do what's called community mapping, and we identify in the earlier phases what's important to the individual, particularly in terms of community activities, and see if those activities, where those activities were actually on a map. You could do it on a Google map or whatever map, and then look at locations and see from there where housing might be situated that would be within close proximity to those particular areas of activity the person is interested in. I mean, is the person, for example, do they like animals? Is there a zoo nearby? That might be something. Do they enjoy being in the water? Is there a water park nearby? That might be another kind of activity to consider in determining location. Okay. So I talked about urban, suburban, and rural. Part of that is proximity to staff, proximity to activities. On the other hand, it can also just be personal preference. Urban locations are going to be busy. They are frequently noisy. You will be in contact with a lot of other people. Some people thrive in that. Some people just don't like that at all. I will tell you that if you're not raised in a city, you may find it challenging to move into a city. It is a, shall we say, an acquired taste. Suburban, you have a mix. Um, Here, things can be a little more low key, so that is certainly a consideration. Rural, that there are some very beautiful areas in Pennsylvania, rural areas. But again, you have to consider proximity to um, the places to shop, houses of worship, medical facilities, and access to your staff. Physical and sensory accessibility needs are also a consideration. There are services within the waivers that can assist with providing you with supports in terms of physical and sensory accessibility. Okay. Other considerations, communication needs, assistive technology and remote supports. We'll talk a little bit about that later. Medical supports. And here, the medical supports, not just offices or clinics that you're going to, but also proximity to providers who, if you have behavioral supports in home, which is a waiver covered service, um, are there agencies that provide behavioral supports if that's something that you need and it's in your ISP? Are there agencies that provide them in your location? And then pets. Now, this is a little not exactly to a geographic area, but specific apartment complexes. Do they accept pets or not? Okay. Next, addressing fears and concerns. So, one issue that has come up with some frequency, both amongst families and amongst some self-advocates, is the fear of going out into the world. When you're living in a parent's home, parents, being a parent myself, feel an obligation to keep their children safe. And we will go to great lengths to ensure their safety. Uh, but when you look at living on your own, it really raises some fears, certainly amongst parents. Will my adult son or daughter be safe? And that needs to be addressed. One way that we have addressed this through our Developmental Disabilities Council projects is by working with those individuals, like Ernie, for example, who are living on their own and actually paying them to be peer mentors. I would call them independent living peer mentors who can describe to both families and the self advocate how they addressed concerns around their personal safety. And it can be very helpful when a self advocate and their family can actually meet an individual who is living on their own. So they get a sense that, oh, well, if he could do it or she could do it, so could my son or daughter. Other ways to address fears and concerns are through assistive technology and remote supports, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And our housing myth busting project did a whole presentation on personal safety and talked at some length about devices and procedures to help an individual be safe in their own home. So I would refer you to that presentation for more tips about personal safety. Okay, so as a housing counselor, what we would typically do is a housing inventory. And this is figuring out, it's basically writing down kinds of questions we've already talked about. Um, what is your vision for your housing? What do you need? What's important to you? And then what do you need to realize that vision? And then we go on once we've figured out, okay, this is what you want. This is what you need. Now let's be very specific. What skills, supports, and resources do you currently have? And then looking against a list of what skills and supports and resources do you need to develop or acquire. So what do you have now, and what are you going to need in the future to make that leap to a home of your own? Next. And in doing so, we want to consider natural supports that you will lose once you have moved. And this would typically be family supports, because part of the idea is that the family will be fading from providing a lot of your natural supports on an ongoing basis, and you will be relying more on your own skills and other supporters, some paid, some natural supports, but not family. So we want to quantify what those supports are. And then realizing what you will be losing, then let's look at additional paid supports that may be needed to substitute for lost natural supports. Next. So now we're going to go to the next part of this inventory, which is the skills and resources. So we're going to look at what are the individual's existing skill sets. And that is skill sets that are important for them to live on their own. Things like planning their own meal, shopping, preparing a meal, house cleaning. Those are the kinds of skills we'd be looking at. Does the individual have that skill? To what degree do they have that skill? Another thing we want to consider is what's called social capital. And that is thinking about who is in your social network. This could be friends, this could be members of your faith community, this could be somebody from, say, Special Olympics, someone who maybe was uh, was a teacher in school, or a guidance counselor, or some other friend who has something to add, some skill they can impart or can serve as a resource. And this comes back to the old saying, it's not what you know, it's who you know. This is the who you know part, social capital. And we talk about existing natural supports, what will be lost, and then the current paid staffing support schedule. So in this, we usually do a schedule of paid supports, and then we look at in this schedule, and this would basically be a calendar, and it would be a weekly calendar, and we could do this for 24 hours each day. And who is providing the supports? Paid, natural. And then we figure out, okay, for the natural supports, which of those are going to be faded or lost? And then, so from there, we figure out what needs to be then supplemented now with increased paid supports, or are there other supports we would call outside natural supports or social capital supports that can be brought in to make up that difference? Or can skills be built up so the individual can do this on their own? And this is an ongoing process, by the way. It's not once and done. So this kind of planning and resource inventory is something you do not just in preparation for moving in, but is also done on an ongoing basis. And certainly this can be part of your annual ISP planning process so that you can look at, okay, perhaps the individual has acquired certain skills, and so we can adjust some paid supports, or there are certain areas that have become more challenging for the individual in their own home, and then we have to figure out what additional supports are needed to meet those challenges. Excuse me. And then we look at income and financial resources. Now, let me say that um, because of the amount of time and amount of information involved in this presentation, as Carrie said, we've decided to split this in half. And so we will talk more about income and finances in the second portion of this presentation next Wednesday. Okay, next slide. Okay, so let's talk about some important personal skills. Communication skills and interpersonal skills, which are needed to establish good relationships. So you may do fine with your family, but living on your own, you have a whole other set of people, and you probably won't know them very well when you move. Those people include your landlord if you're renting, roommates if you're sharing an apartment or a home with other people, and your neighbors. So these are really important, and these are skills that need to be developed not just before the move in, but on an ongoing basis. I can tell you that even if you have the financing to pay the rent, you pay it on time faithfully, you can still be evicted from your apartment if, in fact, you get into loud fights with your neighbors or your roommate or with the landlord. So it is important that you have good communication, interpersonal skills. Now, by communication, I'm not necessarily talking about verbal communication. One of the things that needs to be developed is if you use alternative forms of communication, how can those be shared with individuals outside of your team or network? So that's an important part of planning. Okay, number two, personal hygiene. Um, and I would say, actually, let me expand this beyond personal hygiene. It's also basic cleanliness, both of you personally and of your living space, your apartment or home. Um, because if, in fact, the home gets cluttered, or the home, you leave food around and now you've got ants or roaches or mice, that is a reason for you to be evicted. So you need both good personal hygiene and have good basic cleanliness. Even if you are not able to do it yourself, need to have a plan for how that gets done. Is it a paid support? Is it some natural support? But it needs to be done. And to the extent that you are able to participate in doing this, that's very important. So that's a skill that needs to be worked on. I know that there are programs, for example, where providers will actually bring people into a house kind of setup, and there are some school districts who also do this as a transition skill, where they really help walk a person through, a transitioning youth, through what's needed in terms of cleaning up their own bedroom, cleaning up a kitchen, and putting away food and things like that. So those are skills that need to be practiced and developed. Next is understanding money. Thankfully, there is a great resource. The Pennsylvania Assistive Technology Foundation has a great resource called Study Money, which can really help you understand about money. But it is important because if you're living on your own, you do need to have some fundamental understanding about how much money you have, how much money you can spend, what is your budget, what bills have to be paid, who's going to pay them, because you don't want to end up at the end of the month not being able to pay your bills. You also don't want to be taken advantage of financially either. So the Study Money course is a very important course to take before you move in and to keep up with once you move in, so that you can both acquire and maintain those budgeting and what we call financial education skills. Okay, next. Meal planning, food shopping, meal prep, I had mentioned them before. Cleaning and removing trash, just mentioned them. Ability to follow a plan in case of an emergency. So this is also important. So it could be an emergency, like in Ernie's case, there was a fire. It could be something as simple as a toilet overflows. It could be where the lights go out, there's a power outage, but you need to have a plan. Okay. And also, let me just mention, the plan is not just having the plan, but also practice implementing or following the plan. So I'll give you an example. One of the individuals that we supported through our Developmental Disabilities Council grant, the plan for some of these emergencies was for this gentleman to call his sister. But to do that, he had to learn and feel comfortable using his cell phone. So part of that, so we had the plan and he understood, okay, I'm going to call my sister. Okay, so now let's go through the steps. How do you call your sister? We set up the cell phone. Now, what buttons do you push? How do you turn it on? What buttons do you push? And then we practice that, because in an emergency, it may be overwhelming to kind of sort out, oh my heavens, I don't remember how to do this. So one of the things you want to do is actually practice that. And that is something that can and should be incorporated in your ISP, your individualized support plan. Okay, next. Okay, so next step is develop a plan which identifies where you will seek to develop skills and acquire the needed supports. Who is going to help you do that? And this is part of the ISP planning process. And it is also a part of another service we're going to talk about very shortly, the Housing Transition Service. And also consider social capital. Again, social capital is who you know, as a source to obtain skills, supports, and resources. So in terms of social capital, before we leave that, I'm going to put Ernie on the spot again, because I think this is something, Ernie, that you have talked about before, that you're, and I'll just phrase this for you, and then I'll ask you to talk a little bit about it. In a technical term, social capital, part of your social capital are the folks in your house of worship, the fellow worshipers. And can you describe a little bit about how they assist you in some of the support needs that you have?
Good question. Good question.
Not hearing.
He's thinking.
Thinking.
So
Not hearing anybody.
Bernie and I were together today, and
Oh,
while we were sitting at lunch, you shared that you have a code that you text someone if they need to come get you.
Yeah.
there we go.
And that is C. G. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. 7. M, which stands for come get me, in case of things happens.
All right. And who do you send that to?
I send that to my families of choice.
Okay. And you mentioned you met using your social capital. You met this family member of choice through which activity that you are participate in.
Special Olympics and church.
Great. Right. Well, thank you, Ernie. That was really two very clear examples of social capital and how they can also uh, assist with skills and supports and be a resource. Okay, moving on. So then consider waiver services as sources to obtain skills and support. So I talked about this in the context of the individual support plan, the ISP, and that should be worked in there, should be considered, uh, built into the plan, figure out what skills are needed, and not just in terms of what skills are needed now while the individual may be living with family, but what skills need to be developed. Um, because in the ISP, there's a section second to the last, which is the outcomes section. And the outcomes may be living independently. And so you want to, if you have that outcome, you want to build action. There's outcome action steps in there about how you develop the skills to achieve that outcome. And so we really need to think about, okay, so are these skills going to be part of my support plan? And if so, who's going to work with me on that? Is that going to, if I have in-home community supports, is that going to be my in-home support aide? That is my DSP. Uh, or am I going to have some other skill building service that will be added to the plan? Or maybe there is a skill building service available in the community that could be accessed as well. So that's all goes through your ISP. And then those which are paid should be added to your service plan or support plan. Okay, next. So, planning resources. That seems to be the same thing. Sorry, yes. So, we've talked a lot about planning. I've put here two really excellent guides that can walk you through this planning. And I've put them in here because I really want to stress these. These guides, one from the Pennsylvania Assistive Technology Foundation. It's from their Home of My Own, Preparing for Independence, which is activity 16 in that a very large but very useful guide, Home of My Own. And the Values into Action, they have a housing toolkit, which was developed through funding from Pennsylvania um, Pennsylvania Developmental Disabilities Council. And these two toolkits and guides really help go through what I've talked about in a step-by-step fashion. So you don't have to write all this stuff down. You can just look at these guides, and these guides are actually very helpful in that they have a number of checklists, which you can actually go through and check off these different activities one by one. Okay. Now, now I want to talk about a service which I think is very useful. In addition to those guides and the information that I've provided, there is a waiver funded service where you can actually get what I call a housing counselor to assist you in doing this planning process. If it seems like a lot, well, it is. And to do it right, there's a lot to be considered. So having someone who is skilled and trained in doing this kind of work is very helpful. So this is a service under the waivers. It's available in 3 of the ODP, Office Developmental Programs waivers, and that is the Person Family Driven Support Waiver, PFDS, the Community Living Waiver, and the Consolidated Waiver. I will note, however, that there are some limitations because of the cost of this service. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the point is that it is a service that's available. Unfortunately, it is not available to those individuals who are on the adult autism waiver. It's also not available to individuals who are in group homes or life sharing or supported living, with the exception is if the individual wishes to move out of that living situation into a home of their own, then they can have housing transition as a paid service under their service plan, their support plan, and paid for by the waiver. Okay. What's involved here is doing a lot of the things that I just talked about, this kind of screening, the housing assessment, the skills assessment, the resource assessment, which identifies preferences and barriers related to a successful housing model we call tenancy. And then what comes out of this is an individualized housing support plan. So we look at what's important to, what's important for, we look at needed skills, we figure all these things out, what are the available resources, and then we as housing counselors develop this housing support plan. So this is sort of a mini ISP, if you will, but directed towards housing. And then many portions of the housing support plan will be added into your ISP. Okay. Next, the housing transition service, the whole title is Housing Transition Tenancy Sustaining Service, assists with an identifying resources needed to implement the housing support plan. And we will talk about those resources in the second session. And the other part is you see that it's housing transition and tenancy sustaining. So what does that mean? So the tenancy sustaining means that you can continue to receive this support after you have moved into your own home or apartment to assist you in maintaining that housing. So, for example, I mentioned that you could be evicted even if you pay the rent if you get into fights with your landlord or roommate or other tenants. This is something that the Housing Transition Tenancy Sustaining Service counselor can work with you to try to develop techniques and skills to try and address those kinds of issues. They would also work on skill building and looking at other resources to make sure that you keep your home clean. So those are the kind of things in maintaining housing. Also make sure that you have a system set up to make sure that your rent is paid and your utilities are paid. Now, I will mention that there is a challenge for this service when it comes to those individuals on the PFDS and community living waivers. And that's because those waivers have a dollar cap on the total amount of supports that can be covered under those waivers. So if your other supports are at or near the cap, you may not be able to use the housing transition service, not because it's not covered for you, but because you don't have enough money left in your budget. So for PFDS and for community living, you actually have a budget with a capped budget. And if you're at the top of your cap or near the top of your cap, you may not have enough money to have this service. So that's something you have to discuss with your supports coordinator to look at how much is my budget, how much are the services that I'm currently receiving. And that will be actually at the end of your ISP. There's something called a service summary, which actually breaks down the cost of your services. And then you may have to make some decisions. Is there a service you would reduce in order to have this housing transition service? So you need to consider that in conjunction with your supports coordinator. Okay.
David, if we can pause here for just a second and we can
Right.
find out who is with us, we need to run a poll real quick.
Sure.
So if you wouldn't mind filling out the poll that I just launched, we would greatly appreciate it. This helps us continue to do the work that we're doing, as well as gives us an idea of who's in the audience tonight. If you wouldn't mind filling that out for us, we'd greatly appreciate it. Oh, thank you for your participation. It definitely helps us quite a bit in giving that feedback back. We have some self-advocates with us. We have family members, a good group of family members, some family members and professionals that have dual roles. And we have 2 professionals on with us this evening. Thank you so much for taking the time to fill that out for us. We have 62% of our audience is in adulthood and 5% is from aging adults. Thank you very much.
So that poll actually brings up another thought when you mention aging adults. I will say that for those of us who have begun to realize that we are not immortal, and for those of you who haven't figured it out yet, please do so soon. This kind of planning needs to be done sooner than later because the planning, if done properly, takes time. So you see this line, timing flexibility. Understand that people will move through this process at different paces. Timelines will need to be adjusted to meet persons' preferences, and plans are revisited as a participant's circumstances change. This is all true. And it means that you need to allow a sufficient time because you don't necessarily know ahead of time really what you're going to face in the future. And things do change. The only thing that is certain is that there will be change. And so it is something you really need to take some time to do right now. I will tell you, I've often been asked by families, well, how long does this take? And in a ballpark, I can tell you anywhere from 1 to 5 years. Quite frankly, it is rarely doable in less than a year and very frequently will take more than that. So please don't wait until the ambulance takes you away and you wonder, oh my God, what am I going to do about my adult son or daughter? And it's too late to make these plans. Then these decisions will be made for you. And unfortunately, you won't have a lot of say in that. So timing, realize that you really have to give yourself a lot of time because there's a lot of things involved and you may go through this. Uh, and I'm going to talk about another piece of planning here, which I don't have slides for. Well, let me see. Actually, I do. So let's continue. I'll talk about this a little bit. So addressing support needs. Yeah, let's continue. Yeah, we have a little time. Okay, so I talked earlier about projecting additional skills and supports. So I've already talked about that. Quantify the natural supports, and I said about developing this schedule, a 7-day, or actually, yeah, a 7-day schedule, um, and hourly to look at paid supports, natural supports, time that is not supported, and figure out what's going to be lost, what will be additional needs, and so you can quantify both additional supports that are lost and what additional supports are needed. Will they need to? Can they come from other sources, or do they need to be paid supports? And then those need to be developed into the ISP. So let's move on. Uh, so we talked about addressing skills in the ISP, and I had mentioned that earlier, and I talked about the outcome phrase, independent living outcome phrase. You don't have to use that phrase. It happens to be a phrase that we often have used in individuals' ISPs, because the outcomes are what justifies the services. So in developing an ISP, and I will say that Vision has good training programs on ISP development, and I would suggest that you participate in one of those workshops. But to give you a real thumbnail sketch of this, you don't start with, oh, I need so many hours of in-home community and so much of behavior supports. That's not really the way it's supposed to be done. Look at, well, what are the outcomes? And then what do you need to reach those outcomes? For me, I consider outcomes goals, but the term that the ISP uses is outcomes. So we want to think about, so in order to look at these skills that may not be needed right now where you are currently living, I like to put in an outcome phrase called independent living that justifies having these additional services focused on skill development that will be needed in order to move into a home of your own. And here we talked about timing and pace, so that this skill development is going to go at the pace of the individual. This should be revisited, and it doesn't have to wait for the annual review. You know that ISPs can be revised at any time. There's the critical revision, and so you can reassemble the team and say, okay, we want to really take a look at where the skills are, how well the individual is doing in acquiring those skills. Do we need to change the supports? What do we need to do to make sure they're on track? And we also need to be prepared for regression of skills, because that will often happen as well. Okay, next. Sources of supports. So I talked about using the social capital as a place to obtain some natural supports. And Ernie had mentioned about how he uses some of his social capital for some of his supports. Another place for supports is shared supports. And this would be, if one consideration of having a housemate is that there are services, in particular in-home community support service, which can actually be shared if 2 or 3 people are co-located together. And this would, so this is an opportunity because there is actually a procedure code in this service for one staff supporting 2 people or one staff supporting 3 people. It's not just one-on-one. So you may have opportunities for shared staffing if you have a housemate who is also on the Consolidated Community Living or PFDS waiver. However, there are some potential effects on shared housing if the individual is on SSI and the expenses, the housing expenses, are not shared equally. There is a possibility of reduction in SSI payment under something called in-kind support and maintenance. That's getting into the weeds, but it's just something you should be aware of. There are folks, benefits counselors, who can help you figure some of this out. Okay, next. Then identify changes needed to waiver services. So I've already talked about that. I talked about the budget caps and the ISP development process. So we can, there's something called a variance. We're going to get into that in a minute. So let's move on. So the supports coordinator, we want to assist that individual in integrating housing related objectives in the ISP. So one way of doing that is having the supports coordinator add the outcome independent living to your outcome statements. And that in turn then allows for the development of additional services in terms of skill development. Also, how the ISP can support housing search process and the use of outcome statements to this end. So, and this also would include adding the housing transition tenancy sustaining service into the ISP. And reviewing supported living and reverse life sharing as options. I'm going to talk more about those. Supported living, I'll talk about them in a minute. Life sharing is, I'm going to actually leave that for the second session because it has some interesting additions in terms of financing. So categories of intellectual disability and autism waiver services. So now we're talking about categories where the individual can live in their own home. By their own home, I mean a home which is not owned by their service provider. So one category or a group, kind of an umbrella here, is what we call discrete services. And these are services that are provided in the individual's own home or in a family home. And they are separate services. Each has their own requirements, their own billing codes, their own provider qualifications. And the common ones that we see are in-home and community supports that your DSP, or if you're self-directing, your SSP. Companion services, most typically used overnight, and community participation supports. And these 3 services are generally not provided 24/7, though we'll talk about the special approval process. Another category is called supported living, and a third is life sharing. I will be discussing reverse life sharing in the second presentation next week. I'm just going to talk about reverse life sharing. The typical life sharing, you are not living in your own home. That is, by own home, a home in which you are either have a lease or you are the deed holder of a house. Okay, next. Now, discrete service considerations. There are pros and cons. The positive part is with discrete service, you can choose which providers you want for each of these services. And for in-home and community supports, you can choose to direct those services yourself. That means you actually choose the individual. So you could choose an agency, but under the participant directed service model, you actually choose the individuals who provide that service. And this gives you even more control over your supports. Now, there are other presentations about this model, so I'm not going to go into a great detail. I will mention that there is a service which is most useful if you choose to direct your own service, and that service is called Supports Broker Service. And that is covered under all three of the waivers. Unfortunately, again, not under the adult autism waiver, but it is covered under Consolidated Community Living and PFDS. There is a challenge for people under community living in that that service is added to your budget, so you may not have enough money in your budget to afford that particular service. That's the pro. The issue is that if you are using multiple providers for these services, then you have the issue of coordination. And in reality, although some of that coordination is to be done by your supports coordinator on a daily basis, that often falls on the family. So if the person is moving out, you have to figure out how that kind of coordination of multiple service providers will be done. So that is part of the planning process. And if you have a housing counselor, that is something that they would assist you in doing. Okay, next. Now, overnights with discrete services. Now, the challenge here is there is a provision in the waivers. And by the way, when we talk about overnights, we're really talking about consolidated waiver. There's not enough money in anybody's budget for under PFDS to do overnights. And it's very challenging, though not impossible, under community living. But the rule is that a waiver participant cannot receive more than 14 hours a day combined of in-home community supports, companion, and CPS, community participation supports, unless they get special approval from the county and state. That approval process is called a variance. So if the individual wants to use this discrete service, that is to use bundling these separate services together, the in-home community supports, companion services usually overnight, community participation supports during the day, and bundling them together to provide a package of supports that can meet their needs throughout the day 24/7, they will need to get an exception from Office Developmental Programs and their county, and that exception is called a variance. Next slide. So the variance is done on a form that the Office Developmental Programs has developed, and it's a mandatory form. And your supports coordinator fills out this form. The form indicates what exactly you're asking for. If it's 24/7, then there's actually, you have to schedule how many of these hours are going to be CPS, how many in-home community supports, how many are going to be companion, over which days. And then there's a section where the supports coordinator needs to document the reasons why you need more than 14 hours a day. And usually they're looking at behavioral needs and or medical needs in terms of the overnight hours. So those need to be documented. Now, as I said, companion is usually the service. If you get this variance or exception, that's usually the service that is approved for overnights. The reality is that is a much lower paid service than in-home community supports. So it is often difficult to find staff for those companion hours. Also, some individuals may have needs which may be challenging for someone at the companion level. So you can request to have the higher paying in-home community supports service overnight. That, however, is challenging. What we have seen is that the office developmental programs and the counties are often looking at not just whether the person wakes up at night, because if the person wakes up at nights and needs some direction to do whatever they need, go to the bathroom, or if they need to eat something, drink something, get back in bed, get back to sleep, that kind of stuff, by definition, falls within the companion category. So to have this higher level in-home community supports, one of the things that differentiates in-home community supports from companion is the development of skills, what we call habilitation. And so what I've seen that the counties and the state often looks at, if you ask for a variance for this higher paying staff overnight, is, well, it's not enough that you need somebody to help you because you're getting up in the middle of the night. Are there habilitative skills that are being worked on overnight? That can be challenging, but it may be if the individual is exhibiting some significant behaviors, then is that overnight person utilizing the behavior support plan, which will be identified in the ISP, to help the supported individual develop skills to address, or self-calming skills that they may need to get themselves back to sleep. Those kind of things would need to be documented, and not just documented initially in the variance, but also on an ongoing basis, because these variances are typically time limited. They may be just 6 months and you have to go through it all over again. So in that situation, the skill development that's being done, if you are approved for in-home community supports overnight, that needs to be documented in the service notes. So paid staff have to do service notes after each shift. It needs to be documented in the service notes, not just I helped the person get back to bed, but I was working on the behavioral support plan. We worked on self-calming techniques. Here's what we did, that kind of stuff, that kind of specificity. And also in the progress notes that also have to be done. Okay, enough of that. Let's move on. Supported living. This is a different service model. This is on paper a 24/7 service, so you don't need that variance. However, the reality is, while the provider must provide 24-hour on-call staff, they do not usually provide 24 overnight staff on site. So that can be a challenge. The agency is paid a flat per day rate, so this may not provide enough supports for those individuals who actually need somebody on site, in person, during the overnights. Next slide. Remote supports are often used for evening and those night hours. So remote supports are now, these are part of supported living. And they would typically include, they may be a two-way video camera with audio. They may just be audio. Um, they may have some kind of like a panic button, but the point is there will be a staff monitoring that at night, who can then usually talk to the individual. It may require an emergency staff person to go on site, but usually it's someone who will talk to the individual, help them work through whatever their question or concerns are at night. This supported living service is only available to those individuals in consolidated living or those in community living waiver in needs group 1 or 2, which is identified by their supports intensity scale. Okay, next. There are a number of services which are not available if you use supported living services. So the thing is that supported living takes the place of your DSP, your in-home community supports. The behavioral supports, those are supposed to be provided by the supported living service provider. Therapy, shift nursing, all those things are not things that you can get separately or choose a separate provider. Those are all bundled into the supported living service. So it does limit your choice in terms of these other services. You have to use a supported living provider for those. Remote supports, I think, is next, and we're almost out of time.
Yes, I was just going to say, out of respect for everybody's time, would it be all right if we stopped here?
Right. So I would ask, are people writing? I hope that people will write their questions into the chat. If you haven't done so, please do so. And then, Carrie, um, can you compile those afterwards?
Yes, I will stay on for a few minutes. So if you do have questions, please go ahead and put those in chat. Send them to me, and I will make sure David gets those so he has a chance to look at them and review them. And he will be having an opportunity to respond to what he can next time.
Exactly. So there will be lots more to come next time. We'll talk about different housing models. We will talk about um, um, how to fund renting, home ownership, housing subsidies, and yeah, on other resources. So, and I will certainly try to answer your questions if you put them into the chat the next time around. Appreciate this is a lot of information. I hope we can address your concerns and questions next time. So stay tuned. Hope to see you next week, and we will look at this again.